final glance at the past, Alex stumbled forward through the shattered remnants of the castle, every muscle in his body screaming with exhaustion. Behind him, the once imposing structure of Bran Castle crumbled, its towering spires collapsing into jagged heaps of stone and debris. The earth beneath his feet trembled with each successive collapse. But Alex didn't stop. He couldn't. He paused only for a moment to look back. The glow of the bloodstone, once an oppressive red hue that dominated every shadow, was gone. In its place was darkness, not the malevolent kind that pressed against his soul, but the ordinary, hollow darkness of an empty sky. The air, once thick and suffocating with the castle's ancient power, now felt lighter, clean. The oppressive hum of the bloodstone had vanished, leaving only the sound of the castle's final groans of surrender to time and destruction. But the silence unnerved him, just as much as the noise had. Is it really over? Alex whispered to himself, his voice hoarse and trembling. No answer came. The ruins behind him were silent. The forest beckons. The castle's walls had crumbled outward, spilling debris down the rocky hillside. Alex carefully picked his way over the jagged stones, slipping on loose gravel as he descended toward the forest below. His breath came in short, sharp gasps, each inhale scraping against his lungs like sandpaper. The jagged cut on his arm, where he had offered his blood to the altar, throbbed painfully. Blood soaked the sleeve of his jacket, sticky and warm against his chilled skin. He pressed his hand against the wound in an attempt to stem the flow, but his fingers came away slick with crimson. The forest loomed ahead, its skeletal trees swaying in the faint breeze. The path back to the woods was uneven, littered with rubble and splinters of wood from the collapsing structure. But Alex kept moving, his legs trembling with the effort. Every step felt like an eternity. The trees welcomed him with an eerie stillness, their barren branches creaking faintly in the wind. For a moment, Alex thought he saw movement among the shadows, figures lingering at the edge of his vision. He stopped, his heart racing, but when he turned to look, there was nothing. Just keep going, Alex muttered, forcing himself forward, the weight of survival. As the castle's ruins faded into the distance, Alex collapsed against the base of a tree, his body too weak to carry him any further. He sat there for several moments, staring up at the dark canopy above, his chest rising and falling with shallow, uneven breaths. The events of the night replayed in his mind. The shadow creature, Anna's sacrifice, the destruction of the bloodstone. He felt a deep ache in his chest, not from the physical injuries, but from the weight of everything he had lost. Anna's face flashed in his mind, her fierce determination and the fleeting warmth of her ghostly touch. She had given everything to help him escape, and now she was gone, her spirit consumed in the act of breaking the bloodstone's curse. "Thank you," Alex whispered, his voice breaking. He clenched his fists, his nails biting into his palms. He had survived, but at what cost? The castle was gone, its darkness extinguished, but the scars it had left, both on his body and his mind, would remain. The forest was silent now, the unnatural whispers that had once plagued his thoughts conspicuously absent. The oppressive weight that had lingered in the air since his arrival was gone, leaving behind a void that felt almost as heavy. Signs of the castle's grip. Alex glanced at his surroundings, the moonlight filtering through the sparse branches above. Though the castle was no longer visible, its presence still lingered in subtle ways. The forest floor was littered with blackened patches of earth, and the air carried a faint metallic tang, as though the land itself had absorbed the bloodstone's corruption. He struggled to his feet, leaning heavily on the tree for support. The forest path stretched ahead, winding through the twisted trees like a serpent's trail. He didn't know exactly where it led, but it didn't matter. All Alex wanted now was to leave. As he walked, his thoughts drifted to the diary he had found in the hidden room, now buried beneath the castle's ruins. Its words had guided him, unraveling the mystery of the bloodstone and the castle's cursed history, but they had also condemned him. Was it worth it? He asked aloud, his voice echoing faintly among the trees. The forest, of course, offered no answer. The shadows persist. Despite the silence, Alex couldn't shake the feeling that he was being watched. The hairs on the back of his neck prickled, and he glanced over his shoulder every few steps, expecting to see something or someone following him, but the path behind him was empty. The memories of the shadow creature lingered in his mind, its glowing red eyes and jagged claws etched into his thoughts like scars. Even though it had vanished when the bloodstone was destroyed, Alex couldn't help but wonder if it was truly gone. He tightened his grip on the talisman still hanging around his neck, its rough edges digging into his palm. The village seer had given it to him as protection, but now it felt like little more than a reminder of everything he had lost. The edge of the forest. After what felt like hours, Alex reached the edge of the forest. The barren trees began to thin, giving way to a rocky clearing bathed in the pale light of the rising sun. The sight of the sunrise filled Alex with a strange mixture of relief and despair. He had survived the night, escaped the castle's grip, but the world around him felt irrevocably changed. The village lay in the distance, its rooftops barely visible through the morning haze. Alex took a shaky step forward, his legs nearly giving out beneath him. As he walked, the weight of his ordeal pressed down on him, each step a reminder of the horrors he had faced. A moment of reflection. Reaching a small outcropping of rock, Alex stopped and sank to the ground, his body too weary to continue. He stared out at the horizon, the rising sun casting golden light across the landscape. For the first time in what felt like an eternity, Alex allowed himself to breathe. The bloodstone was gone, the castle was gone, and yet the scars remained. He reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out the talisman. The rough wooden charm was warm to the touch, its surface stained with his blood. Alex stared at it for a long moment before slipping it back into his pocket. "I'll carry you with me," he murmured, his thoughts drifting to Anna, the beginning of healing. As the sun climbed higher into the sky, Alex forced himself to his feet and continued walking. The village grew closer with each step, its simple houses and narrow streets a stark contrast to the nightmare he had left behind. He didn't know what he would tell the villagers, or if they would even believe him. The bloodstone, the castle's curse, Anna's sacrifice, they felt like fragments of a nightmare, too surreal to be real. But Alex knew the truth. He had lived it, and though the scars would never fully heal, he was determined to carry on, to honor Anna's memory and the countless lives lost to the bloodstone's insidious power. The ruins of Bran Castle lay far behind him now, its darkness extinguished. But the journey ahead was only beginning. A strange ache. Alex trudged forward, his boots crunching on the frost-covered grass as the forest thinned around him. The village was close now, its quiet rooftops visible in the distance. But he couldn't bring himself to feel relief. His body was racked with pain, deep, bone-deep aches that pulsed with every step. His injured arm throbbed mercilessly, the makeshift bandage he had wrapped around the wound stained with dried blood. The deeper he moved into the open air, the more the wound seemed to burn. He stopped at the edge of a narrow stream that cut through the forest, its waters trickling softly over smooth stones. Kneeling down, Alex dipped his good hand into the freezing water and splashed it over his face, gasping as the cold bit into his skin. But the momentary relief was short-lived. A sharp, stinging pain lanced through his injured palm, forcing a hiss from his lips. He unwrapped the blood-soaked bandage, his breath hitching as he examined the wound more closely. The cut should have been a clean line, but the flesh around it was discolored, darkened veins radiating outward like tendrils. And embedded in the center of the wound was something small and sharp, a faint glimmer of black and red, barely visible against his torn skin. "What the hell?" Alex muttered, his voice barely above a whisper. The shard of the bloodstone. His fingers trembled as he pressed around the edges of the wound, trying to get a better look. The shard was no larger than a splinter, but its surface pulsed faintly with the same eerie red glow he had come to associate with the bloodstone. "Impossible," he whispered. He had seen the bloodstone shatter, felt its power dissipate as the castle crumbled. How could a piece of it have survived, let alone ended up inside him? Alex reached for the shard, his fingers hesitant as they brushed against its jagged surface. The moment he touched it, a jolt of energy shot up his arm. causing his entire body to seize. His vision blurred, and for a brief moment, the world around him faded into blackness. Visions of the Bloodstone. In the darkness, images flashed through his mind, fragmented and chaotic. He saw the shadow creature, its red eyes burning with hunger as it lunged for him. He saw the altar bathed in blood, the glowing symbols carved into its surface. He saw Anna's face, her spectral form dissolving into the void. And then he saw something else, a void, vast and endless, stretching beyond the limits of his comprehension. In its center was a pulsating core of darkness, the Bloodstone, whole and unbroken, its malevolence radiating outward like tendrils of smoke. The shard embedded in his hand pulsed in time with the core, its rhythm syncing with his heartbeat. It's not gone. The realization hit him like a physical blow, snapping him back to reality. Alex gasped, his body lurching forward as he clutched his wounded hand. The shard's glow dimmed slightly, but it remained embedded in his flesh, a cruel reminder of the Bloodstone's lingering presence, a haunting reflection. Desperate to ground himself, Alex splashed more water onto his face, ignoring the burning in his palm. He leaned over the stream, staring down at his reflection in the rippling surface. For a moment, he saw only himself, haggard, bloodied, and pale. But then the image began to shift. The edges of his reflection darkened, the water's surface rippling unnaturally. His eyes, hollow with exhaustion, flickered faintly, and then, for the briefest moment, glowed red. Alex recoiled, stumbling backward and falling onto the grass. "No," he muttered, his voice shaking. "No, no, no." He scrambled back to the water, leaning over it again. This time, his reflection was normal. His own pale eyes stared back at him, bloodshot but free of the crimson glow. He pressed his fingers to his temples, his thoughts spinning. Was the shard already affecting him? Had the Bloodstone left more than just a physical mark? The memory of Mihai's words returned, unbidden. The Bloodstone doesn't just take life. It marks you, binds you to its power. The weight of the shard. Alex sat back on his heels, his hands trembling. The shard in his palm pulsed faintly, its presence impossible to ignore. He knew he couldn't leave it there, not with the risk it posed, but the thought of removing it filled him with dread. The visions had felt so real, so visceral. What if removing the shard unleashed something worse? "No," Alex said firmly, shaking his head. "I can't let this stay inside me." He searched the ground for a sharp stone, eventually finding a jagged piece of flint. Taking a deep breath, he positioned it against the edge of the shard, wincing as the pressure sent fresh waves of pain up his arm. With one swift motion, he pried the shard loose. The shard's influence. Blood welled from the wound as the shard fell into the grass, its faint red glow pulsing weakly. Alex stared at it, his chest heaving as he clutched his injured hand. The shard looked so small, so insignificant, but he could feel the immense power it carried. As he reached for it, a voice whispered in his mind, soft and insidious. "Take it!" Alex froze, his hand hovering just above the shard. The voice was faint but clear, its tone both soothing and commanding. "You've already seen what it can do. With its power, you can change everything." "No," Alex whispered, shaking his head. "I've seen what it does. I'm not falling for this." "You don't have to be afraid," the voice continued. "You're not like the others. You're strong. You can control it." Alex's jaw tightened as he forced himself to stand. Ignoring the shard's pulsing glow, he grabbed a handful of dirt and buried it, grinding the soil into the ground with his boot. The voice faded, but its presence lingered at the edge of his mind, a haunting reminder of the Bloodstone's influence. The lingering darkness. Despite burying the shard, Alex couldn't shake the feeling that it was still with him. His hand throbbed painfully, and the memory of his reflection, the faint red glow in his eyes, gnawed at his thoughts. "Am I free?" he muttered, his voice breaking. "Or is this just the beginning?" The forest around him was silent, offering no answers. He looked toward the village, its rooftops just visible through the trees. Part of him wanted to keep walking, to find people, to convince himself that he could leave this nightmare behind. But another part of him, deeper, darker, felt a pull, a connection to something far greater than himself, something that whispered promises of power and control. Alex clenched his fists, his nails biting into his palms. "I won't let it win," he said through gritted teeth. But even as he spoke the words, doubt crept into his mind, a quiet resolve. Alex wrapped his injured hand in a fresh strip of cloth torn from his shirt, tying it tightly to stem the bleeding. His steps were slow and deliberate as he continued toward the village, the weight of the shard's influence heavy on his mind. He knew he couldn't stay here, not in this cursed place. He needed distance, time to process everything that had happened. But as he walked, a single thought echoed in his mind, unshakable and persistent. The Bloodstone isn't truly gone. Its power had left its mark on him, binding him to its lingering essence. No matter how far he ran, no matter how long he tried to forget, he knew the darkness would always be a part of him. And though the castle had fallen, Alex realized with a sinking certainty that his battle with the Bloodstone was far from over. The pull of the castle. The months following Alex's escape were a haze of sleepless nights and frayed nerves. He left Romania, seeking solace in bustling cities where the noise of life could drown out the silence of his thoughts. But no matter where he went, no matter how far he ran, the feeling of Bran Castle lingered, like a shadow draped over his existence. At first, he chalked it up to trauma. The horrors he had witnessed weren't the kind of experiences one could leave behind easily. The Bloodstone, the shadow creature, Anna's sacrifice. It all felt like a nightmare etched into his soul. But it wasn't just memories that haunted him. Strange dreams plagued him, vivid and suffocating. He saw the castle's crumbled ruins bathed in moonlight, felt the pull of the dark forest surrounding it. Sometimes, in those dreams, he stood before the altar, the shattered Bloodstone whole once again, its hum vibrating through his chest. And then there were the whispers. At first, they were faint, barely discernible, soft murmurs at the edge of his hearing. But as the weeks passed, they grew louder, insistent, calling him by name. Alex. He tried to resist. He buried himself in work, surrounded himself with people, anything to escape the voice. But the harder he fought, the stronger the pull became. One night, after a particularly vivid dream in which he saw himself walking through the halls of Bran Castle, his reflection in the cracked mirror glowing red, Alex woke with a start. The words left his lips before he could stop them. "I have to go back. Return to the ruins." The journey back to Bran was unsettlingly familiar. The winding roads through the Carpathian Mountains, the fog-shrouded forests. It was as though nothing had changed. But Alex had changed. He was thinner now, his face gaunt, and his eyes shadowed by exhaustion. His injured hand still bore the scar from the shard of the Bloodstone he had removed, but the wound throbbed as though it had never truly healed. The village at the base of the mountain was quiet when he arrived. The locals eyed him warily, as if they recognized him. Or perhaps they recognized what followed him. "You shouldn't go back there," an old man muttered as Alex passed him. "The castle is dead. Let it stay that way." But Alex ignored the warnings. He couldn't stop himself. The path to the ruins was overgrown, nature reclaiming what had once been the castle's domain. The air grew colder as he ascended, the trees around him dark and oppressive, their skeletal branches clawing at the sky. When he reached the top of the hill, he froze. The ruins of Bran Castle loomed before him, just as he had left them. The once proud structure was now a crumbled shell, its towers reduced to jagged stumps and its walls collapsed inward. But the sight of it sent a shiver down Alex's spine, as if the castle itself was watching him. The pull of the altar. Alex stepped through the ruined archway, his boots crunching on loose stone. The air inside was heavy, carrying a faint metallic tang that reminded him of blood. The path through the ruins was eerily familiar, as though he had never left. His footsteps echoed in the empty halls, the sound swallowed by the oppressive silence. Without meaning to, Alex found himself descending toward the lower levels of the castle, the place where the sacrificial chamber and the altar had once been. He hadn't intended to go there, but his body moved as if guided by an unseen force. When he reached the chamber, he stopped short. The altar, though cracked and broken, still stood at the center of the room. The carved channels in the floor were filled with dust and debris, but Alex could see faint traces of the glowing symbols that had once burned so brightly. And in the center of the altar, where the bloodstone had been destroyed, was a faint red glimmer. Alex's breath caught. He stepped closer, his heart pounding as he reached out with trembling fingers. The red glow pulsed faintly, as if in response to his presence. The curse revealed. As his hand hovered over the faint glow, a familiar voice echoed through the chamber. "You've come back." Alex spun around, his eyes darting through the shadows. The voice was unmistakable, Anna's voice, but the chamber was empty. "You can't escape it," the voice continued, soft and mournful. "You're bound to it now, Alex, just like I was." "No," Alex whispered, shaking his head. "I destroyed it. The bloodstone is gone." "Not entirely," Anna's voice replied, drifting through the air like a ghost. "A part of it lives on, and so do its secrets. The castle chose you, Alex. You've felt it, haven't you? The pull." Alex clenched his fists, his nails digging into his palms. "No, I won't let it happen. I won't stay here." "You don't have a choice," Anna said gently. "The curse has already bound itself to you. The castle needs a keeper, and now that's you." The weight of responsibility. Alex sank to his knees, the weight of Anna's words crashing over him like a wave. He had fought so hard to destroy the bloodstone, to free himself from its grasp, only to realize that it had never truly let him go. The whispers that had plagued him for months now made sense. The visions, the dreams, the pull back to the castle. It had all been leading to this moment. "You mean I'm trapped here?" Alex asked, his voice barely audible. "The castle doesn't trap you," Anna's voice replied. "It binds you. It makes you its guardian, its protector. The secrets you uncovered, the darkness you destroyed, they're not gone, Alex. They're waiting, and it's your burden to ensure they stay buried." "But why me?" Alex shouted, his voice echoing through the chamber. "Why not someone else?" "Because the castle chose you," Anna said simply. "And it never chooses wrong. A keeper's duty." The faint red glow on the altar pulsed again, drawing Alex's attention. He reached out hesitantly, his fingers brushing against the cold, cracked surface of the stone. The moment his hand made contact, a rush of images flooded his mind. He saw the castle's past, its dark rituals, its blood-soaked history. He saw the lives of the keepers who had come before him, each one bound to the castle's will, their lives consumed by its secrets. And he saw himself, standing alone in the ruins, watching over the castle as the years passed. When the vision ended, Alex staggered back, his breath coming in short gasps. He looked at his scarred hand, the faint pulse of the shard he had removed still throbbing beneath his skin. "This isn't over," he said aloud, his voice steady despite the turmoil in his chest. "I'll guard your secrets, but I won't let you control me." The chamber was silent, but Alex felt the castle's presence around him, a cold, watchful force that seemed to acknowledge his words. Acceptance and resolve. As the sun set behind the mountains, Alex stood at the edge of the ruins, staring out at the dark forest below. The whispers in his mind were quieter now, no longer demanding but ever present. He had become what he had fought so desperately to destroy, a keeper. But Alex wasn't the same man who had stumbled into the castle all those months ago. He had faced its darkness, survived its horrors, and emerged stronger. "I'll guard your secrets," he repeated, his voice firm. "But I'll find a way to end this. For good." The wind whispered through the ruins, carrying with it a faint, mournful echo. And as Alex turned back toward the castle, its crumbled walls silhouetted against the fading light, he knew that his battle was far from over.